Jenny Situ from the American Hospital Association. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar titled Imaging Data Science in Action. To present today's session, we are pleased to have with us radiologists from the Mayo Clinic, the UVA Health System, and the American College of Radiology Data Science Institute. Before I turn the program over to our speakers, I have a few announcements. So as mentioned earlier, anytime during the presentation, you can submit a question by typing it in the chat box on your screen. After the presentation, we'll be answering questions from there. You can also download today's presentation slides from the resources box at the top right corner of your screen. And finally, we'll notify everyone by email when the webinar recording and slides are posted on the AHA Physician Alliance website. And with that, let me turn the call over to our presenters for today. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. My name is Amy Kostenas. I am a neuroradiologist and clinical informaticist at the Mayo Clinic. I will be moderating the session today, and I would like to start by thanking the American Hospital Association and the ACR for jointly sponsoring this webinar and allowing the three of us to participate. We'll each give a brief introduction as to who we are and what it is that we do. At Mayo Clinic, I serve as chair of our Enterprise Radiology IT Committee. We are in the early phases at Mayo Clinic of implementing AI solutions into our clinical practice. We've done a lot of work assessing use cases and determining some of the high priority applications that we'd like to implement into clinical practice. And we'll have two homegrown AI applications that will go live this summer. Bibb, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself next?
Okay, Amy, thank you very much. I'm Bibb Allen. I am part of this conversation because I'm the ACR's Chief Medical Officer for our Data Science Institute, which was started about 2 years ago because of our keen interest in making sure that the value of radiology and radiologists is leveraged as AI goes forward. I think the cornerstones of our missions are really to facilitate AI in clinical practice by leveraging the value of radiologists, by interfacing with the government regulators and developers to make sure that AI is safe and effective for our patients, and then to educate radiologists of the value of AI and the impact of AI that will be there on their practices. In my day job, I'm a general diagnostic radiologist at Grandview Medical Center in Birmingham, Alabama. So really wearing the non-academic community hospital hat as far as some of the comments and goals that we'll talk about today.
Arun, why don't you please introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thank you, Amy, and thank you to the AHA for hosting this event and allowing me to participate. My name is Arun Krishnaraj. I am a practicing abdominal radiologist at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I also serve as Vice Chair of Quality and Safety. And I think there are a lot of overlaps with quality and safety when we're going to discuss today the impact that AI can have to improve healthcare overall for the patients that we care for. Working with Bibb and the Data Science Institute, I help oversee the use case panel for abdominal imaging cases, and I think Bibb will talk more about that in the presentation, about the importance of having clinician-driven, in collaboration with data scientists, use case panels to really identify the areas in which AI can have the most impact in whatever field you're dealing with. In our case, it'll be radiology, but I think that the ripple effect of what we're doing in AI and radiology will be felt throughout all of healthcare and healthcare systems. My background is also in public health and informatics, so I like to put on my public health hat as well when we talk about these issues and how population health and cost efficiencies, et cetera, can be impacted by the role of AI.
Thank you both. I think we'll go ahead and dive right into our topics. So I think many people may have seen earlier this week, Vinod Khosla, the founder of Sun Microsystems, was talking about AI, and he said in 10 years radiologists really should no longer be practicing. He also alluded to oncology and said that oncology would be easier to automate than factory work. So for clinicians who may be on the call today and listening into this webinar, is artificial intelligence a threat to us, or do you see it as an opportunity? And what can clinicians learn from what radiologists have seen so far with their experiences with AI?
Well, this is Bibb, and I'll start this off just by saying that as someone who is at the end of my career, every young radiologist that I see, every medical student that I talk about the excitement of artificial intelligence. I'm the person who basically taught myself how to do MRI. It was not there when I was a resident. Certainly PET-CT, all of these innovations. Yet I would start, so some people say that I've seen the golden age of radiology, but I would trade it all again to start over right now, because I think that AI has the potential to be such an opportunity. I think that the people who speak in terms of AI as replacing radiologists, or we should stop training radiologists, don't really understand the difference between what AI can do and what physicians do. Physicians bring creativity, they bring innovation, they bring emotion, they bring empathy, they bring interfaces with patients that are the essence of practicing medicine. AI will never be able to do that. What AI will be is a really important tool that will help us take better care of our patients. Arun, do you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you probably do, based on y'all's experience.
Of course, I would like to echo many of the things that Bibb has shared. In my opinion, AI is the best tool that we have ever had the opportunity to leverage. It will augment the work of what radiologists will do and can do, and all clinicians for that matter, and it will elevate the precision and the accuracy of the care that we provide. I think it would be short-sighted to think that AI at one point will not have an even more profound role, but I think the timeline for that development that is making headlines of in a decade or in 5 years is not reflective of people who understand the breadth of what it is, as Bibb says, that a physician does. I think it will fundamentally alter the role of everybody in a so-called white-collar job. But in radiology, I think it will shift our value proposition to many of those types of tasks that Bibb spoke to, which are the human qualities, the soft touch skills that humans have that is very difficult to replace with an algorithm, the speaking to patients, the helping to coordinate care, the creative and innovative ideas that only come with the interactions with other human beings. But I will stop short of saying that AI may one day replace many of the elements of the work that we do. It's just the timeline for that is unknown and is likely far longer than many of the non-radiologists that have been quoted often of late in the popular press.
Yeah, Randy, let's go to the next slide, and we can talk about a data scientist who is not a radiologist, but understands AI in the sense that it is not about replacing humans, but it is really about making humans and their interactions even stronger. And as Arun said, it may be that the jobs of physicians are different as AI evolves, but I think the timeline is exactly right, that over the decades that it may take for AI to replace, some of the tasks that radiologists do. We're nowhere near that now. Our AI right now is a decision support tool, and in Randy's next slide, this is one of the greatest ones that we've had, and we've used it forever. and that is that the MANT is the lowest cost 150-pound linear all-purpose computer system that can be mass-produced by unskilled labor. I particularly like the unskilled labor part, but humans will drive innovation in healthcare and be such an important part. I think one of the things that I tell the people going into radiology is that you have the opportunity to be your hospital system's basically data scientist, chief informaticist, even more so the integrator of all of the diagnostic information that we'll now be able to bring to bear, that no one person could see all of that, but AI bringing that to bear on each patient, one patient at a time, all happening around the imaging interpretation makes radiologists invaluable to the clinical team.
And some of the tasks that AI will replace are ones that I think many clinicians, including radiologists, would look forward to. These are the mundane tasks of measuring something accurately when you're tired at the end of the day, or trying to find a small dot somewhere that if you get distracted by a phone call, you may not be able to perceive. So those kinds of tasks that AI will replace, especially early on, will be a great boon to physicians across the spectrum.
So maybe we'll go to the next question, Amy.
Sure. So we all have experience with imaging. So if we're talking about imaging, what does it look like when you have a successful use of AI for imaging applications? How does that look for image interpretation, other types of clinical quality improvement, and operational efficiency?
You know, Arun, I think you all have more experience than we have. I think you should probably tee that one up.
Sure. So at the University of Virginia, we've partnered with some leading AI companies. In particular, the one that's highlighted on the slide is our work with Zebra Medical, which is an Israeli-based company. And they provide us with 5 to 6 different algorithms that range from identifying coronary artery calcifications to liver steatosis to osteopenia in the bones, which predisposes people to potentially developing an osteoporotic compression fracture in the spine. The value of these apps, when they are accurate and not overly sensitive and pushing back a bunch of false positives, is it can help us comment on items that we may have, one, either overlooked, or two, don't routinely comment on. And I'll speak to the osteopenia part in particular. The calculation can be run, and you can do it on a routine, for example, CT of the abdomen and pelvis, which is what I read on a day-to-day basis. However, it's not something that we typically include in our reports unless there is a fracture present or something looks markedly abnormal. And with that information, you can now prompt people to begin, for example, therapy for osteoporosis, which has very good regimens to either completely prevent or at least put off the time period in which a fracture may happen. And osteoporotic fractures represent a huge economic burden to our Medicare population in the United States. So if we could prevent even a small subset of those, because most people who should be getting DEXA scans, which is the gold standard, don't, but many Medicare beneficiaries are getting routine CTs for some other reason. So it gives us an opportunity to contribute information that we otherwise wouldn't historically in our current workflows, or provide information that can help people seek out an intervention that can prevent a problem down the line. And the way that we've integrated this into our workflow is pretty seamless, and I think any good workflow integration should be that way, where the alert only fires when there is an abnormality, and the ability to incorporate that into our reports is just single click, and that language is put into the reports automatically. And I think that algorithms that work in that fashion are going to become more and more the norm as the companies get better and better accuracy for the algorithms, which, and Bibb can extol on this quite a bit in the role of the Data Science Institute. That is one area where there's still quite a bit of struggle in industry and partnering with even academic centers is the brittleness or fragility of these algorithms when they're developed at one site with one testing set of data and then attempted to be extrapolated to a new novel set of data or a new site.
Thank you, Arun. I'm going to go back because you were sort of very modest in looking at your work, and I wanted people to have an opportunity to see this slide because so many of these make me think about what the new value proposition is in medicine. Don Berwick back in 2008 and was followed up by some work of others sort of have created the triple aim, now quadruple aim, of providing better care for our patients, improving the health of populations, lowering the per capita cost, and improving the work environment for those that are providing the care. So that's sort of the quadruple aim. And here I want to focus on the population health because as physicians, we spend so much time taking care of people who are symptomatic, and we identify disease once they're symptomatic. And AI is poised to, as Arun says, to be capable of helping us identify patients before they're symptomatic, whether it's through genomics and other radiomics, or as Arun said, when they have a CT scan for a totally another reason. Can we quantify their cardiac calcification? Can we quantify their pulmonary emphysema? Can we quantify their bone mineral density? Can we find, or hepatic steatosis? And then without even bothering to put that information in the report, because I can tell you how many times that I say a patient has pulmonary emphysema when they get a CT scan for trauma. Well, quite frankly, most of the clinician team doesn't really care that they have pulmonary emphysema. They want to know if they have a hemothorax or an pneumothorax or something really bad, and that data is just sort of lost. So how can we use AI to quantify that, say, hey, this meets a threshold of COPD maybe being a real problem for this patient, and actually transmit that information directly to the electronic health record and adding that to the patient's problem list so that when the next physician sees it, it's like, oh yeah, so Ms. Jones was in the emergency room and she had this CT scan, and now we're worried about her pulmonary emphysema. Maybe we should get PFTs and sort of work that up. So the ability of the work that Arun's doing at Virginia and the ability to impact population health management is really an important use case for, or set of use cases for AI in medicine.
Before we move on to the next question, I'd like to ask you both if we could talk a little bit about some of the operational efficiency improvements. One of the things that I've seen successfully implemented with AI in radiology is a triaging type tool that allows radiologists to make diagnoses more quickly and may in fact contribute to things like reduction in length of stay in the hospital. What are your experiences with tools like that?
Sure. I think one area that all radiologists across the country are feeling kind of the heat from is improving report turnaround times while they also see growing volumes of studies hit their list. And what happens is a name on the list with an indication is just that. Many of them, for example, with head CTs, will say history of trauma or fall, etc. A majority, fortunately, will be negative for any evidence of intracranial bleeding. However, a select few very well could have that finding, or it may be subtle. And if it's not prioritized highly on the list, it may take 20 or 30 minutes to get to that study while a patient is suffering and where an intervention can be performed. So AI algorithms that screen the work list and identify potential studies with abnormalities and then prioritize them at the top, or bring to the radiologist's attention that this study should be read next, I think could have a a marked improvement on care such as stroke, intracranial bleed, a positive case for appendicitis, a variety of conditions that, appendicitis less so, but a variety of conditions where time is of the essence in order to increase not only the throughput through the ED, but more so getting people to the care they need as quickly as possible when an intervention can be effective.
Yeah, that's perfect, Arun, and I couldn't agree more. Randy, if you would skip to the 2 slides, because I think in this section we sort of wanted to talk about AI use cases, and really, you know, they will not just be about image interpretation. I think if you looked at in the realm of patient care and safety, and in radiology practice optimization, throughput. So these are use cases that can be designed to make our departments more efficient, to save us money, in that to understand which patients are at risk for being no-shows and try to evaluate for that and plan for that, just sort of like maybe the airlines tend to overbook flights sometimes. Well, maybe if we understand that we have a segment where we have a group of patients that might be historical no-shows, maybe we would sort of overbook that segment, knowing that it's likely that we would have some no-shows in there. Maybe we would pay more attention to getting those patients and making sure they're aware of their appointment and they have transportation and all of those things. And so remember, again, part of the goal of the value proposition in the quadruple aim is improving the care experience for the patients. And I think AI is poised to importantly improve their experience. So I think that was all we had for that section, but we can go on now to the next question. Amy, if you'd like.
Sure. Now that we've talked about what success can look like with AI and imaging, I would like to talk about the nuts and bolts of using AI for imaging and some of the challenges as well. What does it take to get an AI algorithm into use in an individual institution? Can you just buy a finished AI product from a commercial vendor and start using it in a plug-and-play way, or is there more involved?
Well, I'll let Arun talk a little bit more about how Zebra is recruiting customers and what their integrations look like. And then after that, I'll talk a little generally maybe about some of the challenges that that developers are facing, and we can look at some of those.
Sure. I'll talk about, I guess, 2 different angles. One, pre-purchasing or working with the vendor who has algorithms, and then how we develop algorithms in-house. So the former, the vendor that we work with, Zebra Medical, that's highlighted in the ACR Imaging 3.0 case, which was featured on one of the earlier slides, was a relationship that we had built as their kind of an offshoot of our PACS vendor, which is called CareStream. And they did some initial presentations. We discussed with them how this would look. We worked with them at every stage to how it would fit into our workflow. And each algorithm had, just like on Facebook, either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So if the radiologist agreed or disagreed with the algorithm when it fired or what it was noting, it gave an opportunity for them to get feedback on their algorithm despite having been trained on data that was done at either another institution or their institution. So just to take a step back, for any algorithm to be vetted, it first must be trained on a set of data. Typically that data is annotated. That just means that, say you have a chest x-ray, a radiologist, a human radiologist looks at the chest x-ray and says, all right, here's the heart, here are the ribs, here are the lungs. I'm reading this as a negative chest x-ray for any kind of infection or acute cardiopulmonary disease. Then a portion of that the algorithm trains on gets further, or tested on, gets refined and trained, and then ultimately there is a set of data on which it gets validated on to produce a receiver per operated curve, which effectively says how accurate that algorithm is performing. And the final step is then taking it into a novel situation, in this case, our institution. So that's how it worked with Zebra. For the algorithms that we're developing in-house, we're trying to provide testing sets. We're doing one on visceral fat quantification, which we believe is a better marker than BMI for obesity and obesity-related comorbidities. And we try to pick as broad and as diverse a patient population as possible to test it on and train it on. And once we get that validated and we feel like there's a high enough accuracy to roll that out at our own institution, we will build effectively a virtual machine, something that will sit inside our firewall that once the images are acquired, they will be sent here, processed, and then sent back to PACS. We've worked with other vendors that do this, and they appear as two different data sets, and during this period of time, the radiologist can assess how well they're performing. But ultimately, no AI algorithm that you buy off the shelf, especially today, is purely plug and play, that you just turn it on and the world is better and the radiologists are less stressed and there's all this new information. All of it is a work in progress and a tight working relationship with the vendor, if that is the route you go, or your in-house technical development team is necessary if this is going to be successful.
Randy, I was wondering if we could go ahead and advance to the next slide. And Arun, I don't know if maybe you wanted to just walk us through how you get something from concept to clinical practice.
Sure.
It starts, and I think that we'll talk about this as well.
Well, and I'm back. I'm sorry. I had a little bit of an informatics hiccup, as it were. Can you all hear me again now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, I mean, this is sort of one of our slides, and Randy, if you can just click through this. But the idea of this is that to get AI deployed into practice, there have to be standards for use case development, as in looking at converting a concept to machine-readable language with standard inputs and standard outputs. To me, is a very important process, and this is what Arun has been working on, of not just saying, well, we need an algorithm that detects appendicitis or colitis, but how does it do that? What are the data elements that we do? What are the key endpoints for the output that can be then integrated into our practice models? I think without that, it'll just be the wild, wild west, and people will be creating all of these algorithms. And as a purchaser of algorithms, I mean, you won't really know what it does or how it does it. Somebody may say, well, I have a lung cancer detector algorithm. Well, isn't that great? They say this nodule has a 15% chance of lung cancer. This has an 85% chance of lung cancer. A radiologist would tell you that we're going to do the same thing for those patients that have those risks of lung cancer, because that's what's right. You know, you don't want people with having a 15% risk of cancer going unbiopsied. Regarding training, as Arun alluded to earlier, we think it's important that training be not just at one site, and in particular, a standardized way to validate models and get them FDA approved. As Arun said, when there's single institution data, the algorithms tend to be brittle when they're used at another hospital. I'll give you a quick example of a kind of a case study we were doing, looking to see the feasibility of federated learning, of having multiple centers participate in creation of algorithms. So an algorithm developed at the Massachusetts General Hospital worked really well for segmenting the heart. They had really good accuracy in their population. They moved the algorithm. Now the patient data stayed on site, but they moved the algorithm over to Ohio State, where the algorithm didn't work very well. And I'll tell you that the main reason it didn't work is that the prevalence of hypertension in the Midwest was so much more than it was on the East Coast in Boston that the algorithm underperformed in patients with left ventricular hypertrophy, which is a common cardiac disease that people with hypertension get. They were able to use some of their local data to improve the algorithm, to tune the algorithm, as it were, and then the algorithm goes back to MGH, and it still works fine on their patient population. So that's just sort of a microcosm of being able to do distributed learning, and more importantly, making sure that we validate algorithms over multiple patient populations at different institutions with different, the way we do radiology is very heterogeneous regarding the types of CT scanners we have, the protocols that we use, the MR scanners we have. And so all of those things have to be taken into account. And then and then another issue that is how do we make sure they're actually working in practice? And so this is the idea of, can we use data registries? I think most all of you are involved with ACR registries for accreditation or for clinical research or registries like the Dose Index Registry. And that piece gives us the ability to create an AI registry that will look not only at whether the radiologist agrees with the algorithm, but also whether or not, or also gathers the background metadata, so if the algorithm breaks, that the developers can be informed and that information can be fed back to the FDA. This slide that Randy shows just wants us to make sure that we think about all of these things before we deploy algorithms into practice, that they'll obviously be safe and effective, that they're validated across multiple sites, that we are transparent in the way the algorithm works, that can be monitored in practice and free of bias. Again, that bias can be introduced unintentionally, but can be introduced and then with overfitting and underfitting exaggerated. When single institution data is used and it's moved somewhere else, then there's this tendency of the algorithm to want to overfit. And then obviously coverage issues and payer issues as well. So I think we're probably ready for the.
Yep, I think we're ready to move on
the next question.
To the next question. So we've been talking a lot about algorithms that you can purchase from companies that develop them. Is it possible to build your own algorithms for your own local use?
No, there is, as I was commenting on earlier, some of our research scientists had developed a theory in conjunction with some of the clinical teams that I'm on, whereby the concept of obesity as measured by BMI wasn't as effective as looking at the amount of intra-abdominal fat or visceral fat. But being able to develop an algorithm for that took quite a bit of effort. Once you have to have, one, the hypothesis, and then two, you need to have the data scientists who can develop the algorithm. And the next step is you need to have a patient population that is diverse enough that you can create a set of training data for the algorithm to learn off of and to test and tune it, as Bibb had alluded to earlier. And then finally, an equal number of cases that you can validate off of. We chose the issue of obesity because in the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and I don't think this is that different across the country, but obesity is quite the epidemic in the United States, so it wasn't hard to have enough data to train that particular algorithm off of. We showed that it was effective in a mouse model using MRI, and then over the course of last summer have proven that it is working with humans using CT, which is a more reproducible and consistent modality. And we hope to, deploy it in the next 3 to 6 months, at least in the background, to see how effective it is compared to manual segmentation, which we can use as the gold standard. So that's our story for developing a case in-house. What it required was a team of data scientists that could develop and know how to train the algorithm, a group of clinicians who were willing to go through the early stages of identifying where it's completely off and working with the data scientists, and then an IT team that's willing to build a virtual machine to be able to deploy that behind a firewall to test it on real-world patients to see how effective it could be.
On the next slide, Randy, we talk a little bit about looking at data availability for AI development, and this has been a challenge for many developers, quite frankly. The large companies tended to want to swoop in and purchase data from hospitals and cover that with exclusivity agreements that have sort of given the world the opinion that these data are valuable and shouldn't be shared without some theory for monetizing that data. At the same time, hospitals that have done that have had some very bad experiences when they turn over those data to these developers who don't have much experience with healthcare. Even though data are identified, somehow many times they were unmasked, and hospitals realized that their data was being used for purposes that they never really intended. And so now many hospitals have gotten data use committees and so forth and so on, and are very careful about how data leaves their hospitals. I think we all have an obligation to protect our patients' health information and make sure that these data are used in a de-identified way. And I think one of the real opportunities is how can we use evolving data science techniques such as federated learning and transfer learning to improve that. And so, Randy, if you'll let us look at the next slide and just click on through to see where the college and the Data Science Institute is looking at this, and the underpinning of all of the AI lab that I'm going to talk to you about for maybe only a minute or so, is that patient data can stay on-prem. I mean, we believe that radiologists need to be able to learn and, as I said, teach themselves and learn how to use AI. And so there's a module about how to learn to do that. But then as it goes forward, being able to work with the use case group and submit cases for or ideas for use cases to be developed. And then it'll have an aggregation tool that'll be able to pull data from the PACS or the DNA so that radiologists can begin to create and mark up data sets that are built in accordance with these use cases. And then once those are there, they'll be able to be used with developers or researchers or others who can bring their model to the data rather than having the data have to go to some centralized repository. So the idea is that the model can come to the institution, the model can be trained, the institution would be able to craft whatever data use agreement they wanted to with the developer. So if it's somebody with big pockets, sure, charge them for the radiologist's time, charge them for the use of your patient data and all of the things that go into it. Don't make it exclusive, though, because other developers may want to use the same thing. So this is a way for hospitals and developers to work in an environment together that protects patient data. On the other hand, if you're like the University of Virginia or some of the bigger institutions with researchers at your hospital who want to build AI internally, well, you don't have to charge them. But again, the data can be aggregated and used on-prem without that. If you want to collaborate with other institutions, then the model can start in one place, say Virginia, and then move to Ohio State, and then move to UCSD, and then with researchers and all of that tuning that algorithm, that helps make the algorithm more diverse. And so this is a big piece of how we see the AI lab working for developing and deploying AI. But the other thing is that and developers are almost uniformly positive about this aspect is that you can actually aggregate some test cases so you can evaluate a model at your institution with your data before actually purchasing it. So this is the whole spectrum of the AI lab, and again, it's something that can be layered on top of the network that you're already probably participating with the ACR, our triad network. And this is just going to be one additional software stack that's part of that. And as I said, we use it for clinical trials research, we use it for the registries, and we use it for accreditation. And so this will just be a no-cost software stack that'll be part of that that'll allow will facilitate collaboration, evaluation, and radiologist participation.
Thanks, Bibb. I'd like to spend the last few minutes before we open it up to audience questions talking about how radiologists and hospital leadership can work together to figure out how AI can be best used in their local sites to improve patient care and efficiency. What do you all think makes for a successful partnership?
So I think one thing for hospital leadership to recognize is that radiology has been and is only increasing in its primary role as an information hub for the health system. Radiology is unique in that nearly every patient that is seen in an American hospital gets some type of imaging, and the radiologist is incorporating data elements containing the electronic health records with information that is seen on the imaging, along with maybe additional information in a pathology database or genetics database to reach their conclusions. So understanding that radiology kind of lives at the nexus of where information is in a hospital is the first thing that I think leadership should recognize. The second is data is how data science and how insights are gained. So if you're going to start to innovate in healthcare and really push the boundaries of what can be done and improve it, then you need to look to areas where the data is the most rich and the most collated and as clean as possible, because frankly the data in the electronic health record is often fraught with numerous errors. Much of it is analog transcriptions from scanned-in notes, et cetera, and the data in radiology is digital and for the most part pretty clean. So if hospital leadership can recognize that, then I think they can begin the conversation to say, all right, we need to work with our radiology departments as we start to think about how AI can impact health. And I think from the same things that we've talked about before, and as Bibb had talked about with the triple aim, population health, you have lung cancer screening, breast imaging for breast cancer screening, CT colonography, and then all of the additional information that can be gleaned from studies that patients receive and that are available, whether you see them or not, whether the algorithm can help you augment what you can see with the naked eye and bring out insights and constellation of findings that you couldn't see. So that is one aspect where it's critically important to recognize that. From a patient experience perspective, the same thing. A patient may say, I paid $2,000 for the scan and all they told me was that my liver enzymes didn't go up because of some anatomic problem seen on the scan. Now suddenly that patient experience can be better and that value proposition can be better because there's now far more information that the patient was able to receive and potentially act on from that study that was performed at a high cost than just the one-liner that they may receive right now, or, oh, we ordered that study and it didn't show anything. And then finally, the third part of the traditional triple aim, reducing the per capita cost of care. If we can get a patient in and identify that they have a stroke early and get them an intervention that prevents a serious and neurologic deficit that's going to result in a transition into a transitional care hospital or a skilled nursing facility, not only does that improve the patient experience, but it reduces the overall cost of care for the patient and the overall health system, because now you're identifying issues that can be intervened on earlier. So I think that recognizing that radiology is an information hub, recognizing that the data is well suited for AI, and also recognizing that radiologists, through their work and through the data that comes in, can impact all aspects of the triple aim. I think it would be smart of hospital leadership to make and forge strong connections with the radiology departments.
Yeah, this is Bibb, and I'm seeing from our experience of just talking around in the Data Science Institute partnership with others, that in particular larger institutions that actually have sort of teams around AI, are many of those people are actually radiologists that are leading some of those efforts. Amy, tell us about what's going on at Mayo in your role as an informatics officer for the hospital.
Well, so I would say radiology is very actively involved, as are many other specialties in developing AI tools that benefit our patients and benefit populations of patients. We are currently developing in-house several algorithms that we'll be using to, for example, look at patients with polycystic kidney disease and start to predict when they may or may not be needing treatment. We're looking at algorithms that will help us to assess things like brain tumors, help us make more accurate diagnosis, help predict some prognosis. We are actively involved at the institutional level in helping to set strategy for where we're going to be going at the institutional level with technology, with AI in particular, and really helping to set direction for what the institution is doing going forward. I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be a radiologist and an incredibly exciting time to be in medicine because there are really so many opportunities that are opening up to us as a result of our ability to really harness the power of big data. So I think at this point we can open it up to audience questions. And just from a logistics and process perspective, you should all have access to the chat box. You can go ahead and type questions into that chat box. And then I will read out some questions aloud that will then answer for the audience. And we've had a few people that have typed questions in as we've gone along. We have a question from Genevieve asking, is AI cost prohibitive at this point? We've talked a little bit about reducing total cost of care, but maybe we could dig into cost and how do we pay for this technology in a little bit more detail.
Well, I'll field that one first. One of my jobs with the college before the Data Science Institute was chair of the Commission on Economics, and going through all of the tedious and mundane work of the Relative Value Update Committee with the AMA, with working on the HOP schedule for the payment of outpatient imaging. We have a lot of contacts with Medicare in Baltimore, and the bottom line is that CMS will say that they're willing to pay for tools that add value to care for patients. And I think that with that said, time will tell on how that value is turned into dollars. So the answer of whether it is cost prohibitive or not is I don't know. I think that hospital systems should investigate the value propositions. Paying for AI one algorithm at a time when there will be thousands of use cases doesn't make a lot of sense. Some developers have and HIT vendors have come up with concepts like an AI app store where you can sort of pick and choose different algorithms or perhaps suites of algorithms. I would think that anything that should drive purchasing should be around increasing the efficiency of the departments and those sorts of issues. Certainly, people will want to be at the bleeding edge to some degree of this technology for saying that their institution is being propelled by AI. There is an algorithm that has gotten FDA approval, not radiology. It's interesting that as much as we would like to think that AI is primarily being driven by imaging, the first one that I'm aware of that is going through the CPT and RUC process is one for detection of diabetic retinopathy. And so I think that we will know in a number of months when CMS writes their proposed rule on that CPT code that's developed, and most of the information will be very confidential until then. But it is public knowledge that was presented to the editorial panel. And so we'll see if there becomes a CPT code for it, what it looks like, and I think that will tell us in general the direction toward payment policy, at least in the fee-for-service environment. Now, in alternate payment models or in capitated systems, then it's a totally different deal. And so it's all about efficiency, right? So there may be more incentives for people to purchase AI tools in that environment rather than those who are primarily in a fee-for-service environment.
So I think we'll move on to the next question. Dennis asks, for image interpretation, CT appears to be the dominant modality that will benefit from AI. Is that accurate, and if so, why?
Sure, I'll take a stab at fielding that one. I think CT tends to be a good one for AI-based algorithms to run on because CT images tend to be the most reproducible. They aren't as susceptible to variances in the operator or in the patient's ability to tolerate the exam. So I'll contrast that with, for example, MRI and ultrasound. So an abdominal MRI, for example, is often fraught with a lot of motion artifact, which blurs some of the findings and can make it very difficult for the algorithm to perform well or consistently. And then ultrasound is one in which a particular sonographer may obtain an image in one way versus the other, or minor differences in the machines may change the echotexture or the brightness of the image. CT technology is pretty mature, and the differences between the vendors is minimal now, and the acquisition time for a CT has gotten to the point where it's almost instant. So except for the most belligerent patient or patient in a trauma situation that has a lot of difficulty staying still, you can usually get a pretty high quality image. And for those reasons, that's why CT is often used as the modality of choice when developing different algorithms.
But I would add that there's a lot of information to be gained for MR, and so the reason that I'm sort of challenged with the phone is that I'm at a meeting where there was a presentation about hepatic steatosis and using quantitative MR imaging with absolute T1 values, not only that predicts the overall presence of steatosis, which then could lead to non-alcoholic hepatitis and on to cirrhosis and hepatic cancer, but also draws a map of where the sites of involvement are. For instance, helping direct a biopsy to the right place and so forth. So I don't think we should underestimate the value that MRI will play in AI. But Arun is absolutely right. When you look at most of the developers that are bringing stuff to the FDA, they are usually around CT or plain radiographs.
I would just like to add a couple things as well. As someone who does a lot of MRI imaging, I think that there's a tremendous amount of potential for MRI in the future and a tremendous amount of interest. MRI is expensive. MRI, as Arun mentioned, can be a very lengthy exam. There are a lot of people looking at AI as a means to help reduce the length of those exams so that they can be shorter for patients, which also improves the image quality and increases throughput. I think the other area where we're starting to see a lot of applications and a lot of potential is in breast imaging, and in particular with mammography. There are a lot of studies that show some promise in being able to look at mammography and predict at a much earlier stage the women who will get breast cancer. So I don't think that we should think of CT as being the only modality that will benefit from this technology. I think we can move on to another question, and this may be the last question before we wrap up. And we talked a little bit about this, but Patrick asks, are there guidelines for using AI in a way that ensures patient safety? What are the concerns beyond potential misclassification or misidentification?
Sure, I think there are a lot of ethical issues that arise with regards to AI. Bibb brought it up in a prior slide, the impact of bias, unintentional bias. The AI will just reinforce whatever it's programmed to look for, and unlike a human may not recognize that it's a bad thing, it believes it's doing its task and doing its task very well. So there has to be oversight from humans to make sure that the insights that the AI is gleaning are truly something that's beneficial and not something that's reinforcing a preconceived stereotype or bias. And to that end, and I'll let Bibb speak to this, the ACR has commissioned a group of individuals, not only radiologists and people with data science backgrounds, but patients and patient advocates, to draft an AI ethics white paper that the ACR is going to be putting out shortly that kind of speaks to these issues and tries to guard against these problems arising.
Yeah, I can certainly, add a little bit to that. The FDA right now, their tendency has been to move computer-assisted or software as a medical device into Class 2 type technology, which means it does not have to have the rigors of a multi-center clinical trial type data to get FDA approval. But at the same time, they probably are trying to implement some special controls that will try to help them look at real-world data. But I think the main reason that they're doing that is that they believe that there'll always be a physician in between the AI and the answer. And so we hope that there will not be physician bias to either underutilize or overutilize the AI. I think most radiologists are fatigued by the false positives that we see with mammography CAD. Just a sensitive type tool, but not very specific, and so there's some fatigue in looking at all of the marks that turn out to be nothing. So I think all of us will hope that the next iteration of this type technology for mammography will improve the specificity. But sometimes with improved specificity comes loss of sensitivity. And I think AI will be no different. I think the bottom line that we can garner from all of this today is that there'll be an ROC curve for individual radiologists that are different in their performance of a single task. And remember, this is not an overall radiologist performance. It's basically their performance on doing sort of one single task. So you know the radiologist may be different in this, but AI is likely to be somewhere in between the performance of the lower group versus the higher group. And in every case, the idea is that AI doesn't have to be a perfect solution in order to improve the care we provide. So sometimes the top performing radiologist may not be the top performing radiologist and benefit, but the idea is that it shouldn't really be a competition between humans versus AI. It should be how humans working with AI will provide the best care we can for our patients.
Thank you, Bibb. And with that, we're just past the top of the hour, so I would like to thank you and Arun for participating and sharing your expertise and knowledge with all of us today. Thanks again to the AHA and ACR for hosting this webinar today, and thank you all for attending. We hope that you found it very valuable and information for being able to implement these tools in your hospitals at home. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Jenny.
Great. Thank you so much. This was a really wonderful and informative presentation, so I want to thank our presenters for today, and thank you all for sharing your expertise with our audience today. Just a quick reminder, we'll notify folks through email when the webinar recording and slides are posted on the AHA Physician Alliance website. And with that, thank you everyone so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'll turn this back over to our operator, Brandon.